Welcome, everyone. Hello to the people who are trickling in. This is Habits of the Heart, Rabbinic Perspectives on Human Temperament and Character with Rabbi Alex Yisrael. This is the third session on February 14th. And whether you're joining in the morning, in the afternoon, or in the evening, depending on where in the world you are, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to be sending invitations to panelists shortly. If I recommend that you take them up. That way you can turn on your camera, you can ask questions directly to Rabbi Israel, or you can show your face. It makes for a very nice Beit Midrash atmosphere. If you can do it, I highly recommend it. However, if you can't do this, if you don't want to, if you like staying the participants, or you're joining us on the Facebook live stream, we want to hear your questions. Do not hesitate to ask them. If you ask in chat on either platform, I will bring them to the teacher's attention. And if you want to be unmuted or to be able to ask a question directly, you can ask me in chat, or you can use the raise hand function, and I'll make that happen. Source sheets for today will be shared in chat momentarily. And with that introduction over, I want to hand things over to Rabbi Israel. Hello.
Okay, fantastic. Wonderful to see you all and to be with you. I hear that it's pretty snowy in New York. Well, here in Israel, we might be expecting rain tonight, but it's been a lovely day here. So wonderful to see you all. And today we are we've already done a class where we spoke about gratitude. And last week we spoke about speech, negative speech, positive speech. Of course, as always, I finished the class last week and said, wait, where was that source that was missing from my source sheet? So I've actually repaired the source sheet for next time I give this course. But today we really have a large number of sources, and I thought that what we'd do today, since we just had Rosh Chodesh Adar, I know that we say that the real Adar is Adar Sheni, but I can't resist. We need it. These are difficult times, and we need a little bit of joy. So I think what we're going to do is talk about joy today and happiness. And without further ado, I'm going to share my screen and see what we can do. Hold on, let me just try and make this a little bigger. Here we go. Well, I'll start off by saying that obviously this is not a simple topic by any means. On the one hand, people are fortunate if they are joyous people, but not everybody is. And a lot of this is to do with personality. I'm not ignoring by any means that many people are living with all sorts of hardship, and that there are some people who are naturally exuberant people, and there are other people who are far more, how should I say it, reserved, quiet, and you know, it's difficult to be able to assess. Also, you certainly can't assess from the outside the degree to which somebody is happy or unhappy. What people look at on the outside is not necessarily how things come over on the inside. So I will say all of those things by way of a cautionary cautionary comment at the beginning. And let's begin with a lovely little story here. The story is in Mesechet Ta'anit, and one of the I think it's an Amora, Rabbi Baroka, is engaging with none other than Eliyahu Hanavi, Zachor Latov. And it says they're walking through the marketplace, and Adahachi Dahachi, Atu Hanach Trei Ati. They see two people walking to them. Amalei Hanach Nami B'nei Alma Da'ati Ninhu. Eliyahu's been pointing out who in the marketplace is worthy for Olam Haba. And he says these two people are also going to go to Olam Haba. So they went up to them and he said to them, "My uvdaichu, what do you do? What's your profession?" And they said to him, "Anshe Baduche Anan. We are jesters, we are comedians, we are clowns. Mevadchinan atzive. When we see people upset, we cheer them up." Right? Some of you maybe have been to hospitals where there are medical clowns, right? I know that I spent a bit of time with a family member recently in Shaarei Tzedek Hospital, and The number of medical clowns around the hospital is unbelievable. Every night, people come round to play music for people who are stuck in the various different departments of the hospital. So this is what they do. When we see people sad, we try and cheer them up. Inami, or or else. When we see two people who are in a fight, we make peace between them. So what do you see from this story? You see that there are amazing virtues in being able to cheer people up by use of comedy or happiness or some sort of means of these people. We also see a little bit that the idea of cheering somebody up when you're miserable, it's the equivalent to when you're in a fight. You're not in a state of calm. And these two people clearly were very interested in making sure that people were in their best mental health space. So I'll just say, I think it's very, very clear that we don't want people to be sad or stressed or what have you. So with that little couple of words of introduction and that nice little story, we're going to jump into a assessment of the question of joy in happiness, joy, ecstasy. Which one is it? And I'm actually going to run through the first couple of pages relatively quickly because I'd like to get to some of the other expressions. When I teach this in a class in person, I do actually do this in 2 shiurim, but I don't want to. We've got a short course of only 8 sessions. I don't want it to stretch over two weeks, so we're going to go for this very quickly. So let's start off with some biblical texts. Tehillim, Perek Aleph, first chapter of Psalms. Ashrei, first of all, the first word of Tehillim, as Rabbi Sachs noted, was Ashrei. Happy, Ashrei ha'ish. Happy is the person, right? I assume it's ish doesn't only mean a man. It means a man or a woman. Happy is the person Asher lo alach b'atzat resha'im, who doesn't follow the way of the evil, v'derech hata'im lo amad, and doesn't go on the way of the sinful, u'v'moshav leitzim lo yashav, and doesn't sit in the company of the leitzim, right? Some of you will know the word a leitzan. A leitzan is a clown. What's a leitz? What is that? We'll talk about that in a second. But rather, b'Torah Hashem cheftzov, v'Torato yehegeh yomam v'layla. He's interested in Torah, and that's where he dedicates his efforts day and night. It's always interesting, this text, because notice you have halach, and then you have amad, and then you have yashav. First you have walk, stand, and sit. Things are slowing down. So don't walk in the company. Happy is the person who doesn't walk in the company of the evil, who doesn't stand in the company of the sinners, who doesn't sit in the company of the leitzim. Now the question is, what exactly? And rather, what does he do? He sits and learns Torah. He learns Torah day and night. What are these moshav leitzim? And interesting enough that they sit. So it seems to be people who are sitting around and joking around. What sort of environment is that, right? Where you're sitting around, joking around. Maybe it's people who are looking to have a laugh all day. Nothing serious for them. Maybe they're laughing at other people's expense. Maybe they're practical jokers. But there certainly is interesting that you could say that somebody who, the first two are clearly Risha'im and Derech Hata'im. They're actually sinners. The third group, what would we call them? Sinners? What I find interesting is that here is contrasted a Torah life, a life occupied with matters of consequence, as opposed to a life of meaning, and almost as if saying somebody who is in this moshav leitzim, is in this. Now again, some people call these leitzim cynics. Maybe they are cynical, right? Maybe they're poking fun. Maybe they're practical jokers. Maybe they're mean, right? We've all been the probably, I don't know if you, I hope not too recently, but if you go back to your school days, sometimes we were the subject of, nasty jokes. I don't know if you were, but I think a lot of people in my environment were. So maybe we've got a sense of what is a good use of time and a bad use of time. And we've also seen the idea that, well, there's something called late sim. It might be to do with comedy, because it's late sim means like a clown or a joker, but these are not a good type of way to spend your time. And look at Kohelet as well. Amarti ani b'libi. Kohelet is a book which tries to examine what you should be doing with your life, and they've got a bunch of different options. Should you be dealing with knowledge or work or joy, all different things. So one of the options is, if you see here in source number 3, Amarti ani b'libi, says Kohelet, I thought l'chanai l'ascha b'simcha v'ra'ei b'tov. I thought I would go and enjoy myself and see all of that. Hu havel. It's nonsense. Hevel sometimes means breath. Hevel piv means the breath from your mouth, like on a winter's day when you can see the breath. So maybe it actually means when you enjoy simcha, it just evaporates, right? Evaporates. It just wafts away. Lischok amarti mulal. Laughing, I did it. That's nonsense. So you can see that Kohelet didn't seem to have a particularly good view. And now I'm asking myself, right? We're seeing so much negativity. Moshav sim. Sometimes happiness can be a very negative environment, or the Kohelet simply doesn't value it. And the question is what to do with this. And it seems to me that the rabbis were very, very nervous about what joy could do. Let's just look at what you see on your screen here. It's a Gemara from Brachot, what Daf Lamed. I'm just going to read, what I'm actually going to be discussing is a pasuk which says, V'gilu barada. I've just highlighted it at the top of source 4. Rejoice with trembling. Which sounds rather severe. Can't I just have a nice time? So Jewish. Rejoice with trembling, right? Be guilty when you rejoice, right? Be guilty when you're having a good time. So what's happening there? So I'll just give you a couple of examples here. By the way, that quote, the Gilu Bira Ada, comes from Psalms chapter 2. Psalms chapter 2. And it says, what's the meaning of the phrase rejoice with trembling? Rav Ada, I'm going to be reading this. Okay. Oops, there you go. The highlighted. What's the meaning of rejoice with trembling? Rav Ada Bar Matana said, that Rabbah said, one may not experience unbridled joy. Even when there's rejoicing, there should be trembling. On that note, the Gemara relates, Abai was sitting before his teacher, Rabbah, and Rabbah saw that he was excessively joyful. He said to Abai, it's written, V'gilu barada, rejoice with trembling. One's joy should not be unrestrained. Abai said to him, it's permissible for me because I'm wearing tefillin. Right? And the commentary from Steindart says, as long as they're upon me, they ensure fear of God. So let me try and summarize what we've seen so far. We've seen 2 comedians who apparently are going to the world to come because they're so great. So comedy's great. We've seen Moshav Sim, which is seen alongside sinning and the evil. So that's not very encouraging. And they say you should just learn Torah. We saw Kohelet, who's very nervous about a life of joy. By the way, the commentaries there say that what the problem with Kohelet was that he wanted to have just joy. You need to have wisdom and joy. You need to have both, right? And maybe that's this quote where it says, rejoice with trembling, a sense of perspective. You can be happy if you're wearing tefillin. You need to, maybe they're worried. Sometimes when people are having a wild time, one of the phrases we're going to talk about is the notion of kalut rosh. Kalut rosh means the idea of having a light head. So if you're not watching yourself, like imagine if somebody was drunk, right? So they don't know what they're doing, right? That's why we don't let people drive drunk. So likewise, the idea being that as Jews who are committed to a certain lifestyle, we should be very careful. A person drinks, they might insult somebody by accident. They might do something. So there's a sense of being level. You can be happy, but make sure you've got your wits about you. Maybe Okay, last introductory source, before we get into the more serious meaty sources. And here, this is again the Gemara from Shabbat, Daf Lamed, and it says like this: "V'shibachti ani et hasimcha," and I praise simcha. Okay, and that is from Kohelet, chapter 8. Okay, and then, so this is the first quote: "V'shibachti ani et hasimcha." The second one is the quote which we read before from Kohelet chapter 2. In other words, there are two quotes from Kohelet and they contradict. Right? Classic Kohelet. One says, I praise joy. The other one says, what's the point of joy? The Gemara, the Talmud, wants to know what the difference is. And here we see something very interesting. Zu simcha shel mitzvah. That's when you have simcha of mitzvah. You go to a wedding, you cheer up somebody who's sick. You, I don't know, you're raising children, so you have a mitzvah of raising children. Or simcha mazel says zu simcha she'eino mitzvah lelamidcha, to teach you she'ein shechina shura, the divine presence will not be there. Lo mitoch hatzvut, you shouldn't be sad. V'lo mitoch hatzlut. Right, atzlut can be, here it's translated as laziness, but I would say lethargy. Don't know if it's laziness, but atzlut he might mean lethargy. Like a person's got no energy, so you shouldn't be atzlut, sad, depressed, atzlut, lethargic, and that's the negative. But not from a sort of jokey perspective or a losing your head perspective, a light-headed perspective. And not in a spirit of chatter or a spirit of nonsense. The best way to have joy is to have joy in the context of a mitzvah. And it actually says that this is talking about Elisha, who when he wanted to get prophecy, he had music. You know, it's interesting. They associate here music with mitzvah. If you go to the Haredi world, the Haredi world standard, they don't listen to, stum music. Not even to something which is like, I don't know, considered to be relatively innocent. They won't listen to Simon and Garfunkel or Peter, Paul, and Mary, right? They won't listen to, I don't know, trying to think of something which is very, very, not raunchy music. They won't. They'll only listen to music which is with psukim. Why? Because the simcha, if you want to have the simcha of music, it should be a simcha of mitzvah. If the mitzvah is reading psukim, it grounds you. So where does this leave us? Because I've got to say that this, for us people who are part of Western society, I think this all sounds quite heavy. Okay, I don't know how you feel about it, but where does this leave us? Can we only be happy if I'm doing Bikur Cholim, or I'm at a wedding, or a bar mitzvah, or a brit, or, doing some sort of mitzvah? Or is there just a general sense of joy that I should have? And that's the question I have. We've seen a lot of negatives, and the negatives associated with excessive joy. This Gemara has now told us a simcha shel mitzvah is good. A simcha which is not shel mitzvah is bad. But the example they're giving us is, we don't want you to be depressed. We don't want you to be lethargic. We don't want you to be losing your head. We don't want you to have kalut rosh. We don't want you to be chatting or talking nonsense. Simcha shel mitzvah. But is there something else? What happens if I just want to live a healthy lifestyle? I want to go for a walk in the park. I want to go to a museum. I want to enjoy tourism. I want to, I don't know, go for a run. I like being with friends, and I want to go to friends with good conversation. No lashon hara. We'll talk about Israel. We'll talk about politics. We'll talk about, well, maybe that will make us depressed. But okay, you know what I mean. And just to enjoy the company of friends. Is that okay? Does it have to be simcha shel mitzvah? What's going on? Okay, so what I want to do is I'd like to discuss a bunch of different perspectives together with you. And now we're going to skip to the next page. Yes, we're actually going to skip the next few sources. I'm going to come back to them. But I'd like to learn with you the Sefer HaChinuch. And the Sefer HaChinuch here, source number 10 on your sheets, is talking about Nismoach b'chagim. Okay, that there's a law that you should be happy on the Chagim. V'samachta b'chagecha v'hayita ach sameach. I'm going to come back to that because we're going to learn the Rambam in depth and we're going to see what he has to say. But I want to point out something beautiful that Sefer Chinuch said, which I think is psychologically very insightful. Just like to stress what Kayla said before. If anybody has a comment or a question, please feel free to either raise your hand or to somehow communicate through the chat. I know I'm talking quite a lot, but sometimes because there aren't so many screens open, so it's difficult for me to see people's faces and whatever. But if somebody would like to share something, please really feel free. You're more than welcome. Okay.
And just a caveat is if you're an attendee and you want to speak up, there's a little raise the hand function or shoot me a message and I will bring it and I can make it so you can speak because we want to hear you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's look at the Sefer Chinuch, and this I think is the first source which gives me a little bit of a room to breathe, right? Because I like doing mitzvahs, but I also just like being happy. So where am I going with this? Mishorshei mitzvah, says the Chinuch. The root of the mitzvah is lefi she'adam nachol anyan shetzarich tiv'o l'sameach lifrakim. Says a human being is constructed, our psychology is constructed that we need to be happy from time to time. We need highlights in our life, right? Some of you might remember, let's say during COVID, it was really hard. You weren't going out, you were stuck at home, there weren't family events, it was hard. It was hard. It felt a little, tough. So he says people need to let go once in a while. Right? Like we need to eat several times a day. Likewise, you need to be happy with a certain frequency. Like you need to sleep, whatever. God wants the best for us. We're his people. We're his flock. He cares. So God wants us to be happy. So he created chagim, right? He created holidays, right? He created times when we take time off work, because of course a holiday is a Shabbaton in the Torah. You're not allowed to work. From the word, lishbot, to rest. So he said, you know what? You can do your simcha for my name. We have times which are festivals, holidays. So basically, this is a fascinating explanation. Why did God command us to have all sorts of chagim in the course of the year? And the answer is, everybody needs a break, and everybody needs a bit of uplift, and everybody needs to have a big family feast. So we've got Pesach, and we've got Shavuot, and we've got Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, whatever it might be. Interestingly, by the way, the Bible doesn't have any festivals in the winter. From Sukkot to Pesach, there's nothing. We have two rabbinic chagim, of course, Hanukkah and Purim, but those were created by the people themselves. But maybe that's just pushing the point. Maybe we need more than just what God gave us. But my point is that the Sefer Chinuch says that psychologically we need this. Okay. Let me maybe hold on a minute.
May I bring a comment to highlight?
Sure.
This is from Judith Edelstein in chat. Quote, I recently taught a Mussar class on Simcha, which differentiated between happiness and joy. The text indicated that happiness is ephemeral, whereas joy is about one's connection to the divine, especially originating in performing the mitzvot.
Okay, so that would be interesting. What you're saying is that joy is, and by the way, the Chinuch says, to a certain degree, says exactly that, right? That the idea of, we don't just want empty happiness, but we use these chagim in order to, and by the way, it's interesting, the chagim are, of course, at times of year when we would be happy. Lots of other cultures have a spring festival, which is Pesach, a harvest festival, which is Shavuot, and an ingathering festival, right, which is Sukkot. Ingathering, a bit like Thanksgiving, I have to say. And what they're saying is that they tie joy into moments which can connect us not only to God, but also to, I would argue, history, peoplehood, and all of that. So we're gonna talk about that. Okay. So let me just say, if you look at source number 9, which again is the Rambam, Haderech Yeshara, the Rambam has this famous philosophy of the golden norm, right? I'm sure people know that. The golden norm that everybody should be in the middle of the extremes, right? You shouldn't be too spendthrift, but you also shouldn't be too miserly, right? You shouldn't be too and lots of things like that. And he says, the right way is the middle way in every single characteristic. So on the one hand, a person shouldn't be like wild and ecstatic and like crazy, but he also shouldn't be sad. Now, this is interesting in contrast to what we just saw from Judith. This is just saying that a person should have a reasonably buoyant temperament, okay? And the Sefer Chinuch is saying that a way to do that is the Chagim. And what's important for me here is, when I was reading the earlier sources, there was a sense that the only joy I could have came out of a mitzvah. Only joy I could have, but I'm saying that I think that in today's world, we are more aware of the importance of mental health, and we're more aware that we have to have a boy, and it makes me happy to see that the Rambam says that there is a happy norm. A person shouldn't be sad. A person doesn't need to be wild and completely nuts, but to have a happy disposition, an upbeat disposition is a good thing. And the Sefer Chinuch goes even further and says, he doesn't say, I can be happy on the Chagim because God's commanded me, Simcha Shel Mitzvah. He actually says it the other way around. God knows that human beings need to be happy. That's the healthy way to be. What God did was, he made it even better than that. He allowed happiness to be anchored in special events, which connects us to God, which connects us to history, right? But the core point for the Chinuch is that we all need moments of release. We all need a bit of excitement, right? We need to have our existence. We go to work from Monday to Friday or whatever it is. But then we need to have those moments. We need to have special moments to look forward to. Okay, so let's try and think about some of what this means. I'm going to get back to the Rambam in a couple of minutes, but first let's take a look at Rav Kook. Okay, I love Rav Kook. Rav Kook is really amazing. And here we go. The Rav Kook, this is from his book Ein Hayah. Ein Hayah is a book which he wrote on the Agadot of the Shas. He wanted to write on the whole of the Talmud. He didn't manage to. We only have Masechet Brachot and Masechet Shabbat, which, by the way, is still 4 volumes, which is quite something. And let's take a look how he says this here. And I love this passage. I think it's really great. And then, so he says like this: Rav Kook Ein Hayah. Oh, there's some English somewhere, I think. So if you have the sheets, oh no, sorry, there is no English. There is no English. There you go. So I'll have to translate. Here we go. So that was the Gemara we read before. The good simcha in Kohelet is a simcha shel mitzvah. The bad simcha is a simcha which is not shel mitzvah, which I said gives me a certain heaviness. So he says, he says there is acting according to. So I want to contrast 2 things. There's darkei hatzedek hamusar v'torah. There is living life by the way of righteousness and of ethics and Torah. And then there is the ways of nitiyot hativiyot shel adam. There's human proclivities, human nature. In other words, as a human being, I can be upbeat, I can be more more sober, more somber. So he says, living life according to your natural rhythm, let's call it, and also according to the ways of tzedek and musar Torah. You can make two mistakes. Let's see what the mistakes were. Ayar pera adam yulav. That's a quote, I think, from Eov. He says, a person, the way that we grow up, if we're left to our own devices, we grow up as savages. Ayar pera, like a wild donkey. And and we need to have some sort of training, right? I don't know whether this matches sort of the Victorian age in which Rav Kook lived, but what he's basically saying is human beings don't naturally become civilized, productive human beings. They need hechsher v'tikun. Amnam, he says, hechsher v'tikun tzarich liyot lo la'adricho ha'ifuk mima she'alav mutba. And here he gets a bit more modern. He says, when a person experiences training, right, training of how to be a well-mannered and purposeful person, it can't be something which brushes against olam mutba. Mimashu alav mutba. It can't go against his inner resonance, his inner character. You won't get anywhere. Rather, you've got to look into what his real inner essence is. So basically what Rav Kook is saying is you have to take the person and a person's natural inclinations and sort of like harness them to good things. So if a person is, I don't know, let's say outgoing, you'll find a way for them to take that outgoingness and use that for a good purpose. If a person's more introvert, you can find something for them too. And if a person is, I don't know, loves being with people, that's great. If a person loves being by themselves. One person might be very studious, so maybe they'll spend their time studying. Another person might be a real people's person, and maybe they'll lead things in the key. Who knows? Okay, and now he goes in and he says this. So I praise joy. Klomar, hasimcha yudua tivit la'adam. Right? What does it mean? I praise joy. Right? That is your natural sense of happiness. Children are happy. Right? We've been going through a war here in Israel, and one of the loveliest things which puts a smile on my face is when I go and play with my grandchildren. Right? You see little children. My grandchildren are age 3 and age 1, and they're just full of the joys of life. And it just, that etzem tivoi elduti, there's a sense of childish joyfulness. And he says, don't destroy that. Don't let that go. Hineni meshabcha, I praise it. Shiruya li sha'er. Now, I want you to understand what he's actually saying is, v'shibakti anei simcha, I praise the notion of joy, natural joy. And that should be chayav eira b'tivo shel adam b'omek nafsho. That should remain alive and awakened in human nature and in the depths of your soul. Even after you become wise and righteous and all of that, keep the child in you, keep that joyful child. But he says, however, l'simcha kazot, simcha shel mitzvah, aval, he says. So he says, in this type of joy, one can really appreciate. So he wants to say that the joy you have is when you manage to attach inbuilt a natural sense of the joyful child within a person to matters of meaning. That's what we want. But now he's going to get to the negative side. But what happens if you don't help somebody to be sophisticated? But you allow them simply to go through life without any training. He actually says something remarkable. He says, unless you train somebody to live a meaningful life, they will eventually go through life and say, what am I living for? There is no purpose in this life. והחשבון שעליו נוסתה הצהלה הילדותית, הלא כולו שקר ותוהו. He says that person will eventually say, my childhood joy, that was just because I was a child. הדבר הנוצץ מרחוק ממראה עליזת החיים החיצונית, יאמר הבירור האמיתי את שקרו. אם כן, לשמחה מה זה עושה? Ironically, what he says is that learning how to be a successful adult is a way of channeling your inner child. And if you don't gain moral and adult sophistication, then eventually you will look at that childhood innocence and you'll say, that was a child, but now in my adulthood, I don't have very much. So this is where he wants to go. So essentially what Rav Kook is doing is he's taking a very humanist approach and saying that our aim is to take our sort of natural happiness, right, and marry that to something which is higher, and that way we can become the ultimate that we can be. So what I've shown you through this Rambam and through the Sefer Chinuch and through Rav Kook is a very healthy attitude towards joy, and the idea that joy should be something which we should allow ourselves. If we have an inner joy, we don't want to be in a state of trauma. We don't want to be staying in depression. We also don't want to be somebody who is like manic in the sense that they are, wild, but a sense of calm, sense of optimism, sense of happiness, not ecstasy or wildness, and also not morose. And the best way to do that, says Rav Kook, is to take that natural joy, and Judaism enables us to sort of harness that and take it higher. Now I'd like to go into a little bit of a Jewish ethic of happiness. We'll start with Rabbi Sachs because that's the easiest entry point, but then we'll take it through the Rambam. Okay? And so let's take a look here with a lovely passage by Rabbi Sachs that maybe you've heard before, but I love it. He says like this, source number 12 at the bottom of page 4. Poor Kohelet, he says, he was the man who wrote Ecclesiastes. Tradition has long identified him with King Solomon. He was, we recall, the man who had it all and discovered it was not enough. Palaces, gardens, wives, wealth, all promise happiness. None delivered. By the way, if you read through Perek Bet of Kohelet, it's all of this. The more wealth, the more worry, the more knowledge, the more weariness of spirit. In the end, all he could say was meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. We recognize Kohelet. He's the billionaire with the private jet, the apartment on Fifth Avenue, the holiday home in Cap Ferrat, wherever that might be, the Armani suits and the expensive wife who discovers that it all adds up to less than the sum of the parts. The route to happiness turns out to be harder than taking the waiting out of wanting. So here he's actually used a very interesting statement, which is happiness, right? In other words, we've used words like celebration, joy, ecstasy, but what about plain happiness? Maybe that's what we all need. Kohelet forgot something that I discovered by chance. Someone had written to the Lubavitcher Rebbe in a state of deep depression. The letter went something like this. I would like the Rebbe's help. I wake up each day sad and apprehensive. I can't concentrate. I find it hard to pray. I keep the commandments, but I find no spiritual satisfaction. I go to the synagogue, but I feel alone. I begin to wonder what life is about. I need help. The Rebbe wrote back a brilliant reply that didn't use a single word. All he did was this. He circled the first word of each sentence and sent the letter back. The disciple understood. The Rebbe had answered his question and set him on the path to recovery. The ringed word was I. It's hard to translate a biblical text from classical Hebrew into contemporary English and still preserve the nuances of the original, but Kohelet's problem was the same as the letter writer above. I built for myself, I planted for myself, I acquired for myself. In Hebrew, the insistence on the first person singular is striking, reiterated, discordant. There is no other book in the Bible that uses the word I so many times as do the first chapters of Ecclesiastes. Kohelet's problem was that he kept on thinking about himself. It made him rich, powerful, a great success. As for happiness, though, he did not have a chance. Happiness lives in the realm called not I. In fact, Rabbi Sachs in his article, Rabbi Sachs in his final book, Morality, has a whole chapter, I think it's chapter 2, about self-help And he says that basically, he says, I've read all the self-help books, but self-help doesn't help. What you need to do is other help. Help others. And that's where I want to go in understanding Simcha. The classic place for Simcha in the Chagim, and now I'm going back to page 2 of the source sheet and to source 7, is the phrase here that you see from the Chagim, right? Here we've got the idea of all the Chagim, you've got Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, and we have the phrase, V'samachta b'chagecha, ha'ita ach sameach. Now, by the way, we all maybe know the song, V'samachta b'chagecha. I have a friend who is a teacher in Yeshivat Har Etzion. His name is Rav Amnon Bazak. He's written several books, and he's a really talented teacher and Bible scholar. And when his students come to his sukkah on Sukkot, invariably they start the song V'samachta b'chagecha, that's tune, and he will not let them sing it. He says, no, you can't sing that song. And of course they turn around to him. It's the most basic song of the Chagim. And they say, Rebbi, why can't we sing this song? And he says, and I encourage you to look at verse 14 and 15. V'samachta b'chagecha, ata uvincha uvitecha v'yavdecha v'amatcha v'halevi v'ager v'yatom v'amana asher b'sharecha. You should be happy on your festival with your sons and your daughters, with your family, with your slave and your maidservant. In other words, with a sense of understanding that your slaves, the people who work for you, who are your service providers, should have a break. And also the Levi and the Ger, Yatom v'Almana, and the poor. Shivat Yamim Tahog LaHashem Elokecha b'makom sheyivchar Hashem, ki yivarecha Hashem Elokecha b'chol tevuatcha u'b'chol masei yadecha v'yita ach sameach. In other words, between the words v'samachta and the words v'hayita ach sameach, we've got three things which give you joy. Number one, family. We should all be so lucky to have a loving family. Number two, looking after the poor, looking after the needy, looking after the people who are less lucky than us in society, who are more vulnerable. And number three, the idea of tying our joy to God. That's the recipe for Simcha. And therefore you can't miss out the sandwich. You can't say the Samachta b'chagecha v'ayitach sameach. The key, it's missing out. Ha'ikar chaser min ha'sefer. Now this is exactly what Maimonides says when you look at his laws of festivals. And I'm going to, just for the sake of ease, please excuse me, I'm going to read in the English. And the Rambam says here, on the one hand, that the rejoicing mentioned in the verse refers to sacrificing offerings. It's a sacrifice, but he says, nevertheless, he's told to rejoice with his children and his household. And what is to be in a manner appropriate for them. And what is implied, and here I'm reading here, this is a little bit gendered and a little bit connected to age, so please excuse me, okay? But this is the Rambam living here in the 12th, 13th century, okay? And he says this, what do we mean? Children should be given candies, kliyot ve'egozim u'magdanot, seeds, nuts, sweets. Children, what do women want? Women, clothes and jewelry. What do men want? Men want meat and wine, right? She'ein simcha ela b'basar v'yayin. So the men want the meat and the wine, the women want the jewelry and the clothes, and the kids just want candies. But now, after he's explained how you celebrate with your family, and by the way, he says it's chag. So buy yourself a new dress, buy yourself a new suit, buy yourself a new pair of shoes, or buy a special bottle of wine, or whatever it might be. But now look what he says. But when a person eats and drinks in celebration of the holiday, he's obligated to feed the ger, yatom v'almanah. By the way, I don't think it's converts, ger. I think ger, I don't like this translation. Ger doesn't mean that. It actually means somebody who is an immigrant, somebody who is an alien, somebody who comes from another culture who doesn't feel at home. But it might also include converts, but I don't think so. A ger, yatom v'almanah, to converts for orphans and widows and others who are destitute and poor. In contrast, a person who locks the gates of his courtyard and eats and drinks with his children and wife without feeding the poor and the embittered is not indulging in a rejoicing associated with a mitzvah, but rather the rejoicing of his own belly, of his own gut. And with regard to such a person, it says in Hosea, their sacrifices will be like bread of mourners, right? It even says worse in Malachi, I'll spread dung on your faces, the dung of your festival celebrations. In other words, for the Rambam, the idea of a festival is a moment where we take our happiness and we share it, right? And I come back to Rabbi Sachs on Kohelet. If it's I, then that's not really joy at all, and you probably won't find yourself happy. What you need to do is you need to, yes, have all of the creature comforts, the candies for the kids, and the dress, the dress, and the jewelry, and the wine, and the meat. Lovely, but he says never forget, right? That at Chagim we have to care for people who are less fortunate than ourselves. By the way, this is built into a lot of our calendar because if you think about it, over the Yamim Noraim, we frequently give charity or tshuva or tefillah or tzedakah, mavirin et roh hagzeira. We'll have a Yom Kippur appeal, a Kol Nidre appeal. But then, of course, we run into Sukkot. So if we've provided for the poor of our community, then they will have supplies for Sukkot. And before Pesach, many communities collect Kimcha de Pischa, right? They collect provisions for the poor, so that they can have a nice Pesach. I'm not sure what we do with Shavuot in this regard, but what I'm saying is that frequently communities already have this built in. But the Rambam's not finished with us. So let's take a look. Let's keep going with the Rambam. I want to look at the next halacha, because look at how the Rambam, he says, he's got two warnings. Number one, although eating and drinking on the holidays are included in a positive commandment to rejoice, one should not devote the entire day to food and drink. In other words, it's not just about, our food and our menus and our, elegant ambiance. The following is the desired practice. In the morning, the entire people, the whole community should get up and go to the synagogue and the house of study where they pray and read a portion of Torah pertaining to the holiday. So go daven in shul. Afterwards, they go home and eat. They go have breakfast. Then they should go to the house of study where they read from the law and review the oral law until noon. In other words, you're getting up at dawn, you're having minyan, saying Hallel together, you come home, have some breakfast, then go back to shul or go back to the Bet Midrash and learn till lunchtime. And afternoon, then they say mincha, and then they go home to eat and drink for the remainder of the day until nightfall. This is what the rabbis call in Masechet Beitza, Chatzi Lashem, Chatzi Lachem. Half is for you, half is for God. Now let's keep going. So the first warning is, while you're enjoying the Chagim and having great food and beautiful creature comforts, make sure you learn Torah and you tie it into something spiritual. And now, the next caveat, halacha chaf, paragraph 20. When a person eats and drinks and celebrates on a festival, he should not let himself be overly drawn to drinking wine, mirth, and levity. In the Hebrew, schok v'kalut rosh. Schok is joking around, and kalut rosh is a light head. And you shouldn't say, whoever indulges in these activities is increasing his mitzvah of rejoicing. Drunkenness, profuse mirth, levity are not rejoicing, they're frivolity and foolishness. We're not commanded to indulge in frivolity and foolishness, but rather rejoicing that involves the service of the creator of all existence. In other words, if you're so drunk that you can't pay attention to your family, if you're so drunk that you are not able to engage in matters of consequence, you're not able to help at home, you're not able to, you say things which are inappropriate, that's no good, right? The whole idea is that the atmosphere should be one which will be joyous, and yet at the same time happy, but at the same time will tie us to, again, what are the three things I said? Family, to those who are more unfortunate than ourselves, and to spiritual pursuits. And I find that quite fascinating, right, in this regard, when we're talking about an ethic of joy, right, ethic of happiness. And if we say the samachta is something about the chagim, right, we have already spoken about the psychological importance. What the Rambam is saying is when we get to these key moments, then that's going to be, significant. So I see there's something in the chat here. Hold on. Take a look.
A question from Judith Edelstein.
How is the orphan widow to experience joy if they cannot offer to care for others? These notions are the financially successful. That's a great comment that Judith is putting there. I will say that when we look at the laws of tzedakah, it's really interesting. When the Rambam gives the laws of charity, he says that everybody should give to people charity, whatever they can afford, and they should try and help them to have a dignified lifestyle. But then he says, everyone has to give charity, even the person taking charity. And I've always seen that as something which, you know, even the person taking has to give. You know, I once read a lovely piece from somebody from Eish HaTorah. Eish HaTorah is not a yeshiva I've learned in, and I don't know the yeshiva well, but the rabbi who was the head of the yeshiva and founded it, Rav Noach Weinberg, it's a Baal Teshuva yeshiva. Frequently people come in knowing very, very little. He was very insistent that whenever you come in, if you're the newest person in the yeshiva, the minute somebody comes and who's on a more elementary level than you should teach him what you learn. That a person should both be a learner, but also be a teacher. And I think the same thing is true. I think it gives somebody dignity, and gives somebody a sense that, you know, that they aren't a shmata. They're not they're not just somebody who's a taker, that we find a way to help them be a giver, right? So I think, you know, hopefully, I hope that we, even those people who are more vulnerable in society, I also hope that today, people who don't have, who are single and of whatever reason don't have a husband or wife, or maybe they've never been married, or they've ended their marriage for some reason, or they've been widowed. I also hope that people who are both converts, or people who are immigrants, or people who are, I hope we're sensitive to them. And I also hope today's world is less of a patriarchal world, and that people can have their dignity, right? But I think if we can put it in a modern context, there are always people to look out for. There are always people who are lonely. There are always people who are needy, and we should try and include them around our table. Or, you know, even the notion of going up to somebody, sending them some flowers before Yom Tov, or sending them, or phoning them, making a phone call, I think makes a big difference to somebody's life, when they know they're loved and they're cared about, and somebody is thinking about them. And I think that's the sort of thing that the Rambam is referring to. Okay, I don't have a lot of time, but you have the sheets and you're going to be able to read it on your own. But I have to deal with one source, which I find the most wacky source of all, and I don't get it at all. But then again, I'm not a chassid, and I'm certainly not a Breslover. Okay, and that is the famous song that so many of us probably know, Mitzvah Gadola Liot B'Simcha Tamid, right? It's a mitzvah to be happy always. I used to go to yeshiva where they used to love making fun of this statement, not make fun, but questioning it, because they said it's not a mitzvah to be happy always. It's a mitzvah to be happy on Yom Tov. In fact, there's some days where it's a mitzvah to be sad, like the 9 days or Tisha B'Av. So some of the people who are rather pedantic used to sing it and say, Simcha Gadola Liot Mitzvah Tamid. It's a great joy to always be in a mitzvah, right? Not Mitzvah Gadola Liot Simcha Tamid, but Simcha Gadola Liot Mitzvah Tamid. Okay, so much for the yeshiva guys. But having said that, where does this come from? And here we're going to take a look at Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, who's the guy who coined the phrase, and you might actually find it a little bit surprising. And let's take a look. It is in source number 13. Hold on. Yeah, 13. Do I have a translation? I do not. Well, we'll manage together. Okay, and he says, this is Likutei Maharan Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. And he says, B'inyana simcha al pi mashal, as regards simcha, he says, Lefamim, shebnei adam smeichim u'murakedim. Imagine you've got a group of people who are happy. They are all dancing, okay? And sometimes chotvim ish echad mibachutz, right? You know that word chotvim, because you probably know the word hostages. It's called chatufim, right? So chotvim, they grab, they abduct somebody from the outside. He says, you've got a circle and everybody's dancing. And there's some guy on the outside, he's feeling down. Marash chora, right? That's actually I think an Aristotelian phrase. He's feeling the black doom around him. He's depressed. And what do? They force him to dance. What do? They grab somebody from the outside and say, come on in. And they force him. So you've got somebody depressed and they say, they grab him and bring him into the circle. Sometimes that is true about joy. Because when a person is happy, when a person is happy, and I want to ask you whether you think the translation should be happy, but use the word sameach. When a person is happy, then his depression and all of his troubles, nistalkim min atzad, simply they disappear. But he says an even higher level is not to be happy and then to forget about your woes, but it's actually to bring all your woes into your simcha. And that is how, and then you can bring all of your depression into the simcha. I'm not quite sure what that means. Maybe somebody's got a suggestion. That all your troubles should be somehow funneled into the joy. And I'll just give you the other paragraph, which is in a similar vein. Mitzvah gdola liot b'simcha tamid. Same thing from Rabbi Nachman. It's a great mitzvah to be joyous always. But what does that mean? Nitgaber ularchik ha'atzvut. To push back against sadness, v'hamara shchora, and depression. B'chol kocho, with all your energy. V'chol ha'chola'at ha'ba'im al ha'adam. And with all sorts of traumas that afflict a person. Kulam ba'im rak mikul simcha. They all come from the fact that you have a disrupted sense of joy. And he says there are lots of doctors who now are discovering, he says, the area of psychology, and they're understanding how important happiness is and how bad depression is, etc., etc. Now, what I find remarkable about this text is that I always thought mitzvah gedol liot simcha tamid is a sort of like, okay, we should be cheerful, we should be happy, we should be, in a good state. But it seems to me, first of all, people do talk about Rabbi Nachman as having suffered with bouts of depression. But this, I think if I was feeling depressed and then people were dancing, maybe you've seen sometimes on visits to Israel, I think this less happens on the streets of New York, a group of Breslovers coming along with maybe a van or a car, and they've got the music blasting, and suddenly they stop at the traffic lights and all start dancing. And there's this sense that, life is tough, and therefore, let's just be joyous. But I have to say the joy there is a sort of ecstatic joy. When I read this Rabbi Nachman, I feel like even he wanted to do the opposite. He said, somehow you do the joy, and the joy will either have you forget your worries, or it will even channel your worries in. But I sometimes think it's the other way around, that sometimes people are putting on a joy, and it's almost like a mask. It's a mask which hides the fact there's actually quite a sad person inside who's got a lot of troubles, and if he jumps up and down, he thinks he can get rid of it, right? And therefore, I have to say, maybe we need to bring a Breslover on next week who will really explain it to us for Breslov, because for me, I tend much more to the tools that the Rambam gave us, that Rabbi Sachs gave us, that the Chinuch gave us. Again, I'll repeat them. The Chinuch said, psychologically, sometimes we need a boost. We need a chag. We need to go out. We need to do something pleasurable. There are places where the Rambam says that you need to go to a museum sometimes and see beautiful things. You need to go for a walk in nature, right? The Chinuch says that's why we have chagim. Rav Kook said, take your inner nature, take your inner child, and harness that to adult pursuits. And that way, you won't be fighting yourself. You'll be channeling it, right? But an unsophisticated person, right, will look back at childhood innocence and say that's nonsense, and will be left with a sort of coarseness. The Rabbi Sachs spoke about other-centered joy, and the Rambam agreed with him, or he agreed with the Rambam. The Rambam said, don't forget, take your joy involve your family, involve others, give to others, and make it connected to something spiritual. And to me, any of those tools, and that we've got quite a good set of tools, should help us to have sort of a healthy joy. Now, of course, we have waverings. There's everyday joy and there's special joy. And that might be the difference between sason and simcha. Simcha might be something we hope we will have on a regular basis. Sason is like specially associated with weddings and things like that. I will just mention the last source on the sheet is from Rav Shagar, who is a very existentialist, even postmodernist thinker, and he has a piece there where he relates to Purim, and that Purim is an unusual form of joy. It's not like the regular joy of the Chagim. You might be aware there's a certain wildness with Purim, and he wants to say that Purim is, and I was thinking about this piece, especially in the aftermath of 7th of October, Simchat Torah, because he says that Purim is a wild joy because it's a joy when we face our mortality. Purim, Haman wanted to kill all the Jews, and there's this sense of this doom and gloom and this vulnerability, and we're on the precipice of annihilation, and then suddenly out of nowhere we get saved, and this creates an ecstasy. It's got nothing to do with historic process. It's almost like a burst, an incredible surge of energy, but what underlies it is our vulnerability. What underlies it is our fragility. And he says, in this regard, Simcha of Purim is absolutely unique and anomalous. It's very, very different to the regular everyday joy or the joy for Chagim. So you can take a look at that piece. It's in the source sheet. Take a look at it in the lead up to Purim. So that's it for today. I hope what I've tried to do, as I've done a lot of times, is try and sort of give you lots of different shades of thinking, and try and get people to think a little bit about some of the features or within the Jewish language of joy. And on that note, I will say להתראות, and look forward to seeing you all next week. I think next week we might talk about meaning making, and take happiness another stage. See where we could go with that. Okay. Tov.
That sounds lovely. I hope to see you all here, or as many of you as can make it here next week. And if you are looking for recordings of our classes, you can find them almost immediately after class on Facebook and on our YouTube channel within a few weeks. Take care, have a good day, and have a good evening.